Hello everyone, welcome to From the Star Wars Home Video Library. I'm your host Nathan P. Butler. This time we take a look at something that is somewhat Star Wars home video adjacent, but is at least a home video item, unlike last time around when it was all adjacent, but definitely Star Wars. We're looking at something here that ties into something we saw a long time ago on the show, very early. When we took a look at the Star Wars and Mythology documentary, where George Lucas sat down with Bill Moyers to talk about Star Wars in the context of mythology, one of the things that kept coming up was, of course, Joseph Campbell. And Joseph Campbell had previously done a very well-received, well-regarded documentary series with Bill Moyers talking about all the stuff from The Hero of a Thousand Faces, The Hero's Journey, The Power of Myth, and all that stuff. It actually got called The Power of Myth. And I mentioned that there was a DVD release of that series if you wanted to actually see that initial Bill Moyers interview with Joseph Campbell, and it also includes a little bonus clip, a tiny bit of material actually from Star Wars and Mythology. They are kind of two linked products here in the minds of those who created them. But this is the one that we saw at the time very briefly there. It's basically 6 episodes, some bonus features, including that little snippet with George Lucas in it as well. This was through a WinStar and Mystic Fire video. Quality's not great. I mean, it's not terrible, but not great necessarily. And it turns out that a while back, unbeknownst to me, there was actually a new edition of this put out through Kino Lorber, the same company, for instance, that just recently put out those Spaceballs releases that we saw. It's a 30th anniversary edition from 2018. That is this. 30th anniversary edition, Joseph Campbell, The Power of Myth, as opposed to Joseph Campbell and The Power of Myth. Still says with Bill Moyers down there. Kino Lorber, 3-disc set, includes bonus documentary, Finding Joe. So this is basically, essentially what you got here, but it also includes an extra documentary here. So yes, the George Lucas bit from Star Wars and Mythology is in here as well. And we'll see there are a little bit more Star Wars connections to it also. There's your cover there. Side there up at the top says Kino Lorber, then Joseph Campbell, The Power of Myth, DVD and product number. Then the back has some shots from it, some stills, bonus feature list here, which we'll take a look at. Legalese and all that down here, cast crew information, various icons. This is Region 1. There are 3 discs in this particular set. We have disc 1. It's episodes 1 through 3, which are The Hero's Adventure, The Message of the Myth, and The First Storytellers. So you notice this has a title, Kino Lorber, DVD, Region 1, legalese going around the edges, the disc number there by the episode numbers underneath. Then you have disc 2 set up essentially the same way. This is episodes 4 through 6, so Sacrifice and Bliss, Love and the Goddess, and Masks of Eternity. And the third one is bonus features primarily carried over from the previous one, plus also Finding Joe. So before we look at anything with the bonus features and whatnot, and a little bit more detail with that and what this Finding Joe thing is, which is new, it says on the back here, in The Power of Myth, the beloved 1988 PBS series, mythologist and storyteller Joseph Campbell joins Bill Moyers to explore what enduring myths can tell us about our lives. In each of 6 episodes, The Hero's Adventure, The Message of the Myth, The First Storytellers, Sacrifice and Bliss, Love and the Goddess, and Masks of Eternity, Moyers and Campbell focus on a character or theme found in cultural and religious mythologies. Campbell argues that these timeless archetypes continue to have a powerful influence on the choices we make and the ways we live. Released shortly after Campbell's death on October 30, 1987, The Power of Myth was one of the most popular TV series in the history of public television and continues to inspire new audiences. Now, as far as bonus features go, we'll look at Finding Joe in a little bit more detail here in a second, but there are some extended conversations with Joseph Campbell that are actually episodes of Bill Moyers' old Bill Moyers Journal TV show from 1981. One's about 55 minutes, one's about 45, where it's basically more interview stuff with Joseph Campbell, which is pretty cool. There are selections of Bill Moyers' interview with George Lucas, as I mentioned. That actually runs about 14 minutes total, so it's small, but it is a substantial little extra here. But of course, if you have Star Wars and Mythology, you've seen that stuff before. Each disc actually has trailers for this, a long and short trailer for Power of Myth, which is a little odd, I will say, that it's on both. The video doesn't appear to be terribly cleaned up. It may have been a little bit. It's hard with my eyesight for me to tell. It seems like it may be a tiny bit cleaned up. But of course, there's new menus and stuff for Kino Lorber and to point out that new documentary, Finding Joe. So what is up with that Finding Joe? No, it has nothing to do with the 2024 presidential election. Different Joe. So it's an odd one, honestly, because you hear the name Finding Joe and it sounds like, especially given the fact that it's on this 30th anniversary of Power of Myth, that it's going to be like a documentary about Joseph Campbell the man, like a biography of Joseph Campbell the man and where his ideas came from and how that affected his life or something. Like it feels like an episode of Biography, except about Joseph Campbell in this case. But it's not even close to that. So Finding Joe is, I would almost call it like a self-help video in many respects. It's basically, these are the ideas of Joseph Campbell. How do we see these played out in real life? How can you use these things from what Joseph Campbell found with mythology and so forth to better your own life experience? Again, it's almost self-help in how it feels when you're actually watching it. They do some interesting stuff. They talk about the hero's journey, the idea of separation, initiation, and return. They actually spend a little bit more time on the return part than a lot of documentaries I've seen on Joseph Campbell, the idea of kind of going back to the original location that the initiation or the initial call to adventure and separation came from. Not the initiation, the separation. And this idea of sort of bringing back that knowledge and whatnot, and starting the next cycle, so to speak, which is pretty interesting to talk a little about myth as metaphor and all. They have some interesting through lines where they have a lot of different people, tons of people I'll list here in a second, as guests talking about these ideas. But when they're showing these ideas kind of played out on screen, a lot of times it's a group of like kids acting out certain things, which was an interesting way of doing it. Kind of a family-friendly, I guess, way of doing it, sort of. There's a big section about the concept of fear. There's an even bigger section about the concept of finding your bliss, which is really where I think the heart of this as a self-help feeling thing really kind of comes from. And they have tons of video clips from tons of movies. Matrix, Fight Club's even in there. Alice in Wonderland, Wizard of Oz, Matrix, Star Wars films. The Matrix gets a very short call-out of its own. Wizard of Oz gets a call-out. Star Wars gets two call-outs. The call-out of Call to Adventure and kind of Luke setting out, and how for him the separation moment is the death of Owen and Beru. And then there's a segment about the cave and the fear of what's within and so forth. But by and large, it's more like they're talking about the ideas, and they'll show tons of Star Wars and other movie clips as they're talking about stuff. But it's not like they're stopping and saying, and you know, in Star Wars, except for those couple of times. Or, you know, in Wizard of Oz, except for, like, the one or two times. So kind of an interesting thing. It interweaves Star Wars as an example, but doesn't go very heavy-handed with it. It's almost as though you could say that Power of Myth is, like, the furthest from Star Wars. Then this is kind of like a middle ground to an extent, using it as an example from time to time. And, of course, Star Wars and Mythology, that is where it finally does bring Star Wars in full bore. As for those who are interviewed, quite a few. We have author Alan Cohen. You have Robert Walter, president of the Joseph Campbell Foundation. I'm going to mispronounce this, I apologize. Chung Liang Al Huang of the Living Tao Foundation. Gay Hendricks of the Hendricks Institute. Filmmaker Rashida Jones. Catherine Hardwick, I believe the director of Twilight. Deepak Chopra. David L. Miller of Syracuse University. Akiva Goldsman. Brian Johnson, Norman Olistad, Reverend Rebecca Armstrong, Sir Ken Robinson, Joseph Marshall III, Lynn Kaufman, Mick Fleetwood of Fleetwood Mac, Robin Sharma, Tony Hawk, the video game guy? Yeah, the video game guy. Professional skateboarder. Tony Hawk, and then surfer Laird Hamilton, and David Loy. So lots and lots of people being interviewed, but it's very much a how do you take these concepts, grasp them, and make them a part of your own life to find your bliss and so on. And where do we see these patterns of the hero's journey within regular everyday lifetimes? So an interesting new item. I have no idea why they called it Finding Joe. I guess the idea was Finding Joe is kind of like saying finding bliss. They're kind of playing off of that, but it really doesn't feel like they're finding much about Joe. More like, let's take his ideas and use them. Finding the rightness of Joe, maybe, but I don't know. But suffice to say, if you're into the Star Wars and Mythology home video release, and you liked Lucas talking about it, and maybe you've toyed with the idea of seeing the Joseph Campbell one, though it is a bit drier, now we have a much more recent recent because I only found out about it recently, but 2018, a relatively recent 30th anniversary release that actually adds some new features to it. Unfortunately, just on DVD, not Blu-ray, from what I can tell, but if you are into that sort of thing and you want to see where Star Wars can be used to help craft an explanation of this, or where the ideas came from for Star Wars that eventually feeds into Star Wars and mythology, the 30th anniversary version of The Power of Myth is out there on DVD from Kino Lorber. My thanks, by the way, to Matthew Hardesty, who happened to spot this when he was looking at stuff on a Barnes & Noble 50% off Kino Lorber sale. With that, we'll wrap up this episode. Thank you for watching, and may the Force be with the home video viewers, even if it's Star Wars adjacent.